Story time about my old roommate who sold his soul to the devil and told me he did. Forewarning, don't watch this video at night. It's been 10 years since I met this person and it still freaks me out to think about. But I figure with it being spooky month, October, I'll share this story. People close to me know about it, but I've never publicly put it on the internet before. That said, this experience definitely made me feel like people can and do sell their souls. And it's one of the reasons I believe in God and light work and positive things and operate from that perspective with everything that I do and talk about. Okay, so I met him, we're gonna call him Dominic for the sake of the story. I met him 10 years ago. I was at a casting call for an MTV reality show in Chicago where I was living at the time. And at this casting call, there were a ton of people. So they separated us into groups of 20 and they brought us around this big table and they were asking us individual questions about our personality, our perspectives, things like that. There was one guy sitting across from me at the table and I noticed that he was noticing me every time I talked. He would kind of nod. And then I noticed that every time he talked, I kind of felt myself agreeing with the things that he was saying. So we kind of became allies around this big group of tables. And at the end of this big group interview, the casting director called this guy, Dominic, me, and then another girl from our group into another room. And he was like, we loved your personalities. We think you guys might be a good fit for the show. We want to keep this interview going. So you're going to just have to wait here. And then we're going to do some one-on-one interviews. So it's the three of us in this room and the guy leaves. And while we're waiting for our one-on-one interviews, Dominic and I start talking more. And I realize that we actually do have a lot in common and we have a lot of the same stances on things, namely spirituality. And we ended up having this really deep conversation about the nature of reality and spirituality and things like that. It was a really crazy conversation to have the first time that you meet somebody. I feel we really just the weather, blah, blah, blah. It was a different kind of conversation, but it was a positive one. Or so I thought. So this goes on for an hour. And then finally they call Dominic into the room. He does his one-on-one interview. He leaves. We don't talk again that day. And we hadn't exchanged information or anything like that. So I'm just wow, what a crazy conversation. What a crazy first meeting of someone. And we leave. A few weeks go by and I went to a music video shoot. It was a hip hop artist. I was there with my friend and we were getting our makeup done when a guy walked in the room, another actor in the video. And when he walked in, I thought that he looked familiar. And then I realized it was Dominic from this other casting call. And I got excited to see him. It wasn't a romantic kind of interest that I had in him. He was very attractive, but it was more just that connection that I felt we had as a friendship or whatever. But I saw him and I was oh my God, hey, we met at this MTV casting interview. And he was also immediately excited to see me. It seemed he was oh my God, I can't believe you're here. It seemed like fate. So as the music video shoot goes on, he and I are just instant besties. We're having these crazy conversations, in between takes, we're out in the parking lot, talking. And that day we did exchange information. So it was phone numbers and emails. And he lived pretty far from me. He didn't live in the actual city. He lived 2 hours away. So he wasn't around much, but we texted and we emailed a lot. We emailed because we were having such deep and long conversations that texting didn't really do it justice. We would send each other basically letters. And this texting email relationship kind of went on for 2 years. We did hang out a couple times when he was in the city. We would get coffee and there was nothing weird that ever happened in this time frame. I just considered him a really good friend. Neither of us ended up getting that MTV show, but he did have some successes when it came to other acting pursuits. And I think it's interesting to note at this point that at the time, both of us were pursuing some kind of acting career path, right? I was just more doing it for fun and because I could and because it came easy. But I do think it's interesting to note that we always hear about people in Hollywood that are selling their souls in order for fame and money and success and all those things. And I just think it's weird that this is what we were pursuing when I met this person. Okay. So again, no red flags at this point, just a deep friendship. 2 years after I meet him, I decided I was going to move to Nashville. I moved here with a friend of mine from Chicago. I wasn't really doing music videos or anything anymore. I actually moved here and I started working at a nonprofit doing an AmeriCorps program in environmental sustainability. And Dominic and I kept in touch when I lived here, but we didn't talk nearly as much as we used to. So the first year of me living in Nashville goes by, and my roommate who I moved here with decided that she was going to move out and get her own place. Fine, no big deal. So I needed to find a roommate. And I hadn't mentioned it really to anyone yet besides our immediate friend group in Nashville that I was looking. And out of the blue, about a week after she tells me that she's going to move out of our house that we were renting, I get an email from Dominic and he was just hey, how are you? Checking in. I hope Nashville's going well. I was just letting you know I've actually been thinking about moving there. I think I'm going to. And I was immediately excited because again, it seemed like fate. I'm just wow, like, here's my roommate. So I fire back. I'm like, this is crazy. I think you should move. I have actually a room opening up. If you want to just like move in here, you can come check it out if you want. He's like, I mean, that would be great. Like, when do you need a roommate? I'm like, at the end of the month. And he was like, I can probably move in next month. Like, let's do it. I'm like, this is awesome. So my roommate moves out and I get the room cleaned up and Dominic moves in. And everything was fine for like maybe 3 months. He got a job right away. He was clean. He was a good roommate, like respectful. And again, this was like a completely platonic relationship. So I really enjoyed his company. Like I would come home from work and he would be home and we would just like have these sometimes really deep conversations, sometimes really light conversations, but again, pretty normal for a roommate situation. And then on month 3 of him living there, things started getting really weird, really dark, and really creepy really fast. There was one night when it was probably around this time of year, like October, and we had both worked that day. He was in the living room watching TV, and I was in the kitchen, like making something to eat, like I think like a stew or a chili or something. But I remember I had like a big stock pot on the stove, and I was like drinking wine, just kind of like in my element. And I felt like somebody, watching me. So I turn around and Dominic is standing in the doorway of the kitchen. And I was just like, oh, hey, this food will be ready like soon, like you can have some. And he just looks me dead in the eye and he goes, I sold my soul to the devil. And I kind of like laughed because that's what an out of pocket thing for somebody to say, right? So I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I sold my soul to the devil. I'm not joking. And like, it really just creeped me out. It rubbed me the wrong way. I like felt myself get chills. I felt my like hands tighten around the pot I was holding. But obviously, like, what would you say in that situation? Like somebody that you've known for a few years tells you this, like, so I just thought it was a joke. And I was like, well, what'd you get? Like eternal youth, love, success, like what? And he does not smile at all. Like he's still just like staring a hole through me. He was like, no, none of that, something better. But I can't tell you what it is because it negates the terms of the deal. But it was worth it at the time. And I was like, okay, Dominic, like whatever. And he's like, yeah, I just thought you should know since we're like living together, the devil never just wants one soul. And he literally does this creepy smile. Like it's burned into my memory. Like I wish I could unremember this. He smiles this weird, creepy, toothy smile. And then he just turns around and goes in the living room and like resumes watching TV. So I'm like, what the fuck? So I like stop what I'm doing and I start texting my friend. I'm like, hey, I want to get out of my house. Like, can you meet me? And she's like, yeah, let's just go to like this place down the street. Like, I'll meet you. I'm like, cool. I have this wild thing to tell you. And she had met Dominic. So like she knew that he was like kind of like eclectic, but like, I was just like, I need somebody else's opinion on this. So I go to meet her. We stay out for a few hours. It was mostly just because I didn't want to be around him. Like I didn't know what to say after somebody tells you this, and when I came home that night, he was like asleep in his room, like everything was fine. So I just like went to bed and just pretended like it was a joke, ignored it. That's what my friend had convinced me, basically, that he was just playing like a weird joke. So I was like, okay. So I go to sleep. The next day happens, nothing weird. He doesn't acknowledge it. I don't acknowledge it. Like everything's seemingly normal. And then the scratching started. So about a week later, I was laying in my bed. I have a cat. It was dark. Okay. The cat is in bed with me. And I hear this like scratching, like on the walls. Like, I don't know if you can hear that. But that's what it sounded like. It sounded like there was an animal in the walls. And we were renting an older house, so it wasn't that weird for me to think like a raccoon got in the attic or like there were maybe mice or something. Like, I don't know. So my cat noticed it too, and he was like staring dead at my closet. So I get up out of bed, I turn on the light, like I go to my closet and I'm listening, and I hear the scratching again. I look in my closet, can't figure it out, but I notice it's coming from like the back corner, like the back wall of the closet, which the other side of that was the living room. So I just like bang on the wall and the scratching stops. And I go back and I lay down and then it starts again. And so I'm like, what is going on? I wasn't really that freaked out. Again, I thought it was an animal. So I get up out of bed, I turn on the lights again, and I go out into the living room and it's dark, but I see a figure crouched down against the living room wall, like by the bottom of the wall. And I realize it's Dominic, and he's crouched down and he's scratching the wall outside of my closet. So I'm like annoyed at this point. Like I flip on the lights. I'm like, what are you doing? And he like does this weird, creepy smile again. And he's like, I just wanted to prepare you because sometimes he likes to check in. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, this time it was me, but next time it might not be. So just like be prepared. And then he goes, okay, good night. And he walks back into his room and closes the door. I'm gonna have to make part 2. I'm so sorry, but I promise you this story gets even effing creepier.